I want to start by thanking Leon, not just for that introduction, but as you heard, we go way back. I remember that first run for the United States Congress, going to a number of diners in Prince George's County and campaigning throughout the 8th Congressional District in Maryland. And Leon was there helping guide the way, and as he said later when Catherine and I had our children baptized at St. George's, you were part of that as well. So thank you for your leadership here of AHIF. Are you the foundation chair? I thought so. All right. I'm just trying to keep it straight here. But thank you for that. To Jim Lagos, who I was just talking to, thank you for your chairmanship of the other part of AHI. And to my very good friend, Nick Larigakis, who I've known for many, many years, as I think lots of people in this room have. Thank you for your steadfast support. And I do remember Gene Rosides very well, who was also a great supporter when I first ran for the state legislature in Maryland. Having grown up in a foreign service family, family of diplomats, I know they've been introduced, but I do want to thank them again and recognize them. I see our very good friend, the Greek ambassador, Nasika. Thank you very much. Catherine and I got to know her when she was here the first time in Washington, and it's the first baptism, that's right. And to Ambassador Sava, thank you for your leadership. It's been great to get to know you as well since you've been here. To my dear friend Phil Christopher, who has been clearly the stalwart, the guy who's carrying the torch on this issue for a very long time. And I share and feel your frustration, Phil, about the fact that we have not made the kind of progress that we want here on the 50th anniversary of the invasion. I also want to say to the folks from the U.S. government, thank you for being here. Eric Holgren is here. Holgren, thank you for being here. And as I was walking in the room, I talked briefly to a former ambassador, U.S. ambassador, to Greece, and the U.S. Special Cyprus coordinator, Tom Miller. Where's Tom? I want to thank you. And two very good friends from the United States Congress, retired members who are here. Tom McMillan, who represented Maryland in the United States Congress. And Jim Moran, who represented the other side of the Potomac River, but is a very good friend. Thank you both for your support. I know Ambassador Theros may be here as well. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Great to see you. And I do apologize. As I look around the room, as I say, I see many, many individuals who have given their heart and soul to addressing the issue of justice on Cyprus. And as we gather here to mark the somber anniversary, 50 years since Turkey's brutal and illegal invasion of Cyprus, it is important to both take stock of where we are and where we need to go, because it was in contravention of international law and the United Nations Charter that Turkey's invasion in 1974 left over 200,000 Greek Cypriots, over 1/3 of the population, forcibly displaced. And its illegal occupation continues to this day. And I was just talking to Jim and to Nick, and I do think that the more the United States actually is serious about applying a rules-based order in a consistent way across the world and uphold the values and rule of law that we say that we stand for, the better off we will all be and the more credible we will all be as a country. So like many of you, I have walked the Green Line, as has Catherine, and I'm really pleased that Catherine could join me this evening because, as many of you may know, her 96-year-old mother is from the island of Kefalonia, and What's that? She is tough as nails. She is indeed. And Catherine and I were married in the Greek Orthodox Church. I always say if you're married in the Greek Orthodox Church, you know you're married because you do everything 3 times. We just celebrated the marriage of our oldest child, Anna, at St. Sophia's, carrying on that tradition. So you should know that Catherine was also on the House Foreign Affairs Committee working for Lee Hamilton on many of these issues. When I was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff working on these issues, you can imagine all the jokes everyone used to have about the difference between foreign relations and foreign affairs. But the reality is that we both were working back in the 1980s on these issues together. We often joked that we'd have our conference committee at home. So I think many of you have walked that green line where you can see to this day a scar running across the island, cutting through forests, cutting through fields, leaving entire neighborhoods in Nicosia abandoned like they were frozen in time. I have led bipartisan efforts in the Senate to condemn Turkey's ongoing aggression, including efforts in the Senate to condemn Turkey for reopening the tourist quarter of Varosha in the city of Famagusta in blatant defiance of the EU and the UN Security Council. It's absolutely outrageous for Turkey to bring in tourists to Varosha's hotels while blocking its original rightful inhabitants from returning to their homes there. And like Phil and so many of you, I've spoken to families whose lives were upended by that invasion 50 years ago. 50 years may have passed, but the pain is very much in the present tense, and it will remain until we address its root causes. And only justice in Cyprus will heal these wounds, and it's vital that we build that structure of a bicommunal and bizonal confederation. That's why, as we gather here 50 years later, it's been way too long, but we have to state very clearly that we do not and we will not accept the status quo. It is why we continue to pursue the mission of reuniting the island and bringing justice to Cyprus. And through my many years in public service, I've been very proud to be an ally and friend in this important effort and this important mission. And we need to state very clearly that we will not give up on our aspirations until we make them real. I, as many of you know, began my first official work on Cyprus back in the late 1980s. I'm dating myself for many of you who I've not known over that period of time. I was a staff member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I worked with then chairman of the committee, Claiborne Pell, who was a great friend of Cyprus and Greece. And among the portfolios I had was the Eastern Mediterranean. So Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. So in 1989, I traveled to all 3 of those countries to meet with their leaders. Some of you may remember President Vassiliou had just been elected president in Cyprus. He was an outsider, a reformer. We thought maybe this was a moment where we could finally achieve our goals of peace and unification. And I came back to Washington and I wrote a report, a Senate Foreign Relations Committee report, entitled New Opportunities for U.S. Policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. It was a hopeful title, and I will say I said in that report, and you can get it, it's just a bestseller on Amazon, but at that time, I urged the United States to be much more proactive in trying to seek a just settlement on Cyprus, both for the purposes of justice, but also for our own national security interests. And I remember very vividly at the time Paul Sarbanes, Senator Sarbanes from Maryland, was on the committee. He reviewed the report, he liked the report, and he said we've got to continue to push the U.S. government to move in this direction. Now, 35 years later, I'm not a staffer on that committee anymore. I am a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I will say very clearly that the advice and recommendations I gave in that report then, I believe we should follow now, which is the United States needs to be much more engaged in seeking justice and a peaceful reconciliation on Cyprus. And if it's... And I was pleased now that I'm a member of the committee, senator on the committee, when our current ambassador to Cyprus, Ambassador Julie Fisher, she came to her confirmation hearing. This is good preparation for her hearing for confirmation, and she brought a copy of my report from 35 years ago. So when I voted for her, I said, I'm counting on you to work to implement the recommendations in this report. Now, here we are, and there are those that would say, with 50 years past, we should not continue to push on. And I think we're here tonight to say we will not stop in our efforts to achieve justice in Cyprus. We all know too well, and I made this point in that report years ago, that Turkey's belligerence against Cyprus and against Greece presents a continued threat to regional security. And within the Eastern Mediterranean region and in the Middle East, Turkey, under Erdogan's leadership, has repeatedly proven to be an unfaithful NATO ally. As Phil said, they're a member of the NATO alliance, but they often do not act like a member of the NATO alliance, and we need to hold them accountable, which is why a number of years ago, when Turkey purchased the S-400 system from Russia, I was one of just a few people who led the fight against transferring the F-35s to Turkey, because it would have put our NATO pilots at risk and therefore compromised the national security of the alliance. Now, we were just talking about the F-16 sale. I'm not going to revisit the F-16 sale. I was one of the people who said we should not move forward on the F-16s, not only because at that time Turkey had not yet voted to support the admission of Sweden and Finland into NATO, but also because of Turkey taking aim at the primary force that the United States worked with to expel ISIS and defeat ISIS, and those were the Syrian Kurds. And Turkey, during that time, actually went against the United States. They were not focused on targeting ISIS, they were focused on targeting our allies in that effort against ISIS, the Syrian Kurds. So there were lots of issues regarding the F-16s and their use. I will say that many of us worked to get assurances from the Biden administration that they would reach an agreement with Turkey regarding limitations on their use. That, of course, is only as good as whatever agreement was reached and the extent to which it is abided by Turkey going forward. And while I will also say that we have seen in the aftermath of the F-16 sale and the limitations that we, I believe, applied, or the assurances that we sought as part of that, we have seen since then the Athens Declaration made between Greece and Turkey. We have seen a reduction in the fighter jets and warships that are stalking each other in the Aegean. We've seen a reduction in the violations of Greek airspace, but I say cautiously optimistic because whenever you're dealing with Erdogan's Turkey especially, you cannot just be optimistic. You always have to take it with a grain of salt. And I remain very troubled. And even as we see this Athens Declaration, when it comes to Cyprus, Turkey's actions have gone from worse to worse. I mean, they remain very aggressive in their tone and in their substance. In fact, this past March, President Erdogan told military officials that, quote, had we advanced further south, Cyprus would have fallen entirely under our control. Statement from Erdogan. And that gives you a sense of exactly what his mind frame is 50 years later. In the Mediterranean Sea, the Turkish Blue Homeland Doctrine demands sweeping control of the Mediterranean, and it violates the exclusive economic zones of Greece and Cyprus. These regions hold key economic assets. As you know, gas deposits, wind farms, fishing, tourism, and more. And Turkey threatens those opportunities every time they drift into Greek or Cyprus's sovereign waters. This is again to underscore the importance of enforcing, and the United States being and not just an advocate, but an implementer of international law. Just this summer, the Turkish Navy violated the Greek EEZ to disrupt early work on the Great Sea Interconnector, which is an EU-based project to connect the electricity grids of Crete, Cyprus, and Israel with a 2,000 megawatt submarine cable. That kind of provocation does not just slow down a cable project, it does undermine the Athens Declaration. So good fences do make for good neighbors, and we cannot build lasting trust in the Eastern Mediterranean when Turkey keeps violating Greece and Cyprus's territorial integrity, whether it's by sea or by air. Just this month, the Turkish Cypriot leader, Tatar, predicted that U.S. support to Cyprus would falter, that it would fade away over time. He said, and I quote, "They are here today, but tomorrow they could be gone," unquote. I think we're here to say, and I do think on this issue, I can speak for my colleagues on a bipartisan basis, that we aren't going anywhere. And I do want to say that under both Democratic and Republican administrations, while we have not done nearly enough to address the issue of justice on Cyprus, we have strengthened our relationships with both Greece and with Cyprus. In 2019, I co-sponsored and helped pass into law the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act, which enhances U.S.-Cyprus relations. In 2020, I led the effort in the Senate to enroll Cyprus in the the International Military Education and Training Program, the IMET program, which for those of you who follow it, and I see a number of individuals involved in defense, it's not a huge amount of money, but in my view, it's very important at building relationships between the defense forces of our various countries. And then starting in fiscal year 2023, we fully lifted the arms exports and transfers restrictions on Cyprus. That was the embargo. It was done for a year. It is now done on an annual basis. The Biden administration has continued to lift that restriction through fiscal year 2025. I would like to lift it on a permanent basis. And I will say that while that remains the goal, Senator Cory Booker and I have submitted an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Bill to say that this does not have to be reviewed on an annual basis, that we will review it every 3 years. As I say, the goal is ultimately to lift the restriction, but it's not something that should have to be reviewed on an annual basis. So I hope you can all talk to our colleagues on the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee to get them to support that provision. We haven't seen the manager's amendment yet on the bill. And of course, the United States continues to support the United Nations peacekeeping force in Cyprus, which has played a really important role on the island.
We've also worked much more closely together. Our countries, both the United States and Greece and the United States and Cyprus, with respect to Russia's war against Ukraine, Cyprus has made the very important decision to join its European partners in sanctioning Russia and fighting sanctions evasion. That was a very important step forward. Cyprus also continues to work closely with the United States, including the FBI, to punish sanctions evasion and fight money laundering. Cyprus is also hosting over 2,000 displaced Ukrainians and has provided demining and landmine clearance training to members of the Ukrainian military. And it has also been involved in the effort to provide more humanitarian assistance to people in Gaza. I will say on this point that while we're grateful that Cyprus opened up that port and it was functioning kind of okay when the J-lots were there, now this equipment, these humanitarian supplies are going to the port of Ashdod. But what I want to say about this is that the best way to get humanitarian assistance in is through overland routes, and that the Netanyahu government needs to allow more humanitarian assistance in now, and that we need a ceasefire and a release of hostages right now. So I know President Biden spoke to the President of Cyprus about all those issues. It was another recent sign of the important relationship that we have. Let me just say one word now about our other really important partner in the Eastern Mediterranean, as represented here by Ambassador Seeker, because I think it's also true that the U.S. relationship with Greece is stronger than it has ever been before. And thank you for your great representation. You're great too, Ambassador. You know, I am the son of a diplomat, so I know that ambassadors might see that. And my father was a career Foreign Service officer. He was ambassador to Sri Lanka, so I can spot you, ambassador. But the reality is that, like Cyprus, Greece has been indispensable in supporting the effort against Putin's aggression in Ukraine by opening the port of Alexandroupolis as a linchpin to the supply chain of military equipment. Greece has also been a very important partner with our Operation Prosperity Guardian with respect to the sea lanes in the Red Sea area. And we have further strengthened our ties this year with the United States announcing plans to transfer 20 F-35s to Greece. That was another important step. We've also worked to strengthen our relationship through the Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act, which I mentioned before, that was made part of the fiscal year 2020 as benefits authorization. And I'm committed to working for full implementation of that legislation. So in closing, I think the good news is this. I think over the last decade and more, the United States has strengthened its bilateral relationships with both Greece and with Cyprus. We've widened those relationships and they've gone deeper. That's the good news. The bad news, as we reflect here this evening, is that we've not made progress on the 50 years of Turkish occupation of Cyprus. And it is time that we be creative and that we use our leverage in the United States along with the EU and others to really insist that this be part of every conversation and that we make sure that we are putting those tools together in a way that advances that important mission. Because 50 years of occupation is way too long, and we want to make sure that we're not having future gatherings like this on the 60th or 70th anniversary of the occupation. We need to redouble our efforts to do it now. That's what I wrote in that report 35 years ago, and I still believe it today. And we do have a new administration coming in, I don't know what to expect. I really don't. I mean, I know some things to expect, which I'm not looking forward to. I really don't know what's going to happen when it comes to some of the foreign policy issues. I'm certainly worried about areas like Ukraine and other parts of the world, but I don't know. And so we will see what happens. But I think if we keep as our guiding principle adherence to international law, that serves the interests of Cyprus and Greece and the United States of America and the global order, which the United States has been for so long dedicated to pursuing, but unfortunately, in my view, doing so in a way that is not consistent. And if we want to be successful, we need to do what we say. Thank all of you for being here.